Being a first-time voter, I should be happy, but I'm not happy because the two candidates aren't what I expected.
Being a first-time voter, I'm very excited because it's not something I've done before. So
today we are talking Nigerian elections. We're talking Nigerian elections because this channel is not just about South African elections and South African issues. We're going to try to give coverage of all of the other electoral races that are happening all across the continent, and maybe even go beyond the continent, because we are interconnected as a world and we can't just focus on ourselves as South Africa. We need to look at all of the different dynamics of the region and how those dynamics affect us. So Nigeria is having their election. I was going to put this video up on election day, but when I woke up in the morning, things had changed dramatically because of this announcement.
Many confused voters showed up to polling stations on Saturday, unable to cast their vote in an election that has been 4 years in the making.
This is the place where I will vote. That is why I came here very early in the morning, and there is no way out. This is a height of incompetence. The country has never experienced this. That election could be called on the day of election. Who does that?
The election was postponed only a few hours before polls were due to open, and the Independent Electoral Commission didn't give much of an explanation.
Following a careful review of the implementation of its logistics and operational plan, and the determination to conduct free, fair, and credible elections, the Commission came to the conclusion that proceeding with the election as scheduled is no longer feasible.
Elections in 2015 and 2011 were also delayed, but no vote has ever been postponed just hours before polling was to begin. Nigeria's two main political parties say this is an attempt by the electoral body to manipulate the outcome. Others say the Commission has been unable to handle the sheer size of the vote. More than 80 million people are eligible to cast their ballots, and the country has 120,000 polling stations. Those numbers make the election the largest electoral event in Africa's history.
Now that you understand how Nigerian elections got delayed by 1 week, we can go back to the content that I had designed to help you understand everything that's happening there. So now, here's a quick run through the relevant information about Nigeria before we talk about the election and the candidates and the implications thereof. Number one, Nigeria is Africa's most populous country with 196 million people who are living in the country. They also have a massive global diaspora of several millions. The actual number is unclear, but some people say it's well over 10 million. So Nigeria is a large country. Globally, Nigeria ranks number 7 in terms of most populous country. And the projections are that post-2050, Nigeria will actually be the 3rd largest country in the world, period, with over 350 million people in its locale. So Nigeria is a massive, massive country in terms of population. Number 2, Nigeria is Africa's largest economy in size. Largest economy, I think it's over 350 billion US dollars in size, but I'll check that number and I'll put it up, the correct number. But ultimately, what you need to know is our largest economy. In addition, Nigeria is Africa's largest oil producer. So most populated, largest economy in size, and also largest oil producer. All of those things ought to indicate, I think, either attention that, well, you got so many people, but you got this great resource oil. Maybe there's going to be some tensions in distribution. And that's exactly what happened. Some people live very, very wealthy lives in Nigeria, the best lives. They live better than people living in Dubai even. But a lot of people live in abject conditions in Nigeria, right? According to reports that have been released, there are over 80 million people, 80 million people who are living in abject poverty in Nigeria. They are living on less than $1 a day, which is 15 rands if you use like a high rating for the rand. 80 million. Nigeria has a massive poverty problem. There are more people living in poverty in Nigeria than there are in India by some estimates, right? So that's Nigeria's problem. The other problem that Nigeria is facing is one of service delivery. There isn't running water from taps in many places. The electricity grid is unreliable, and I'm being very generous here. Most people don't even bother with the electricity grid. They use generators. Generators are the go-to thing. I've been to Nigeria. I spent some time there. I was in Imo State, and we traveled to Lagos, and there's basically no power. There wasn't any power anywhere, and that's the norm. And sometimes in places where there is power, the power can be gone for 2 weeks or even longer than that. So power supply is horrible. There isn't like fiber internet. There isn't like a massive penetration of broadband. The way people access the internet is via their smartphones. And the internet usage in the country, according to the CIA report and other reports, the CIA fact book, sorry, is 20%. So 20% of that 196 million are actually mobile using phones. That's a large population, but it's not near enough of the population. So they've got that problem, but they also have a massive problem with security. Boko Haram still very dominant in the north, and then you also have the Fulani headsmen who have basically been terrorizing the central areas of the country, causing mayhem, and Buhari has been very soft on them. So they've got that issue as well, and then they've got a massive issue of corruption, people looting the state's resources, people, basically taking money from the poor and pocketing it. It's a problem that exists all across Africa, but Nigeria is one of the countries which is on the higher end of the rankings in terms of corruption. And if you look at the Global Competitiveness Report, I think they score 4 out of 100 on their controls for corruption, etc. So those are the challenges facing the country, and those are the things that are worrying the country. And the country's population actually is a very young population. Over 50% of the voters are under the age of 50, and 40% of the national population is actually under the age of 14. 40% under the age of 14. Can you imagine? Nigeria is a very, very young country in general. And the irony of all of this is that the top candidates who are running for president, both of them are over 70. So let's talk about those candidates. Let's talk about who they are, who really stands a chance. So there were 170 something people who registered their parties intending to run, but the people who made it to the finish line, there's about 76 candidates whose names are going to appear on the ballot. And those people, basically, some of them are just making a name for themselves regionally. There were some youthful candidates who were running, but they didn't have enough money, to be honest. They had some attention, but not enough attention. And as a result, they're not really going to stand a chance. But they made a good impression. What ought to be done by those younger candidates is that they run as a unitary ticket, and they may have a chance considering the youthfulness of the population. But as it stands, the two leading candidates for this election are actually MUHAMMADU Buhari, who is the incumbent president representing the APC, and Atiku Abubakar, who is actually a guy who served as vice president twice, who is representing the PDP. So the APC is the current government. They're very popular in the north, very popular in places like Lagos, etc. But they're not very popular in the south. And the south is the richer area, and the north actually is poorer and has more problems. But unemployment, ironically enough, is highest in the south. In the oil belt, the unemployment levels can get all the way up to 40%. So Buhari got in as this guy who ran Nigeria for 20 months, high discipline, high morale, high integrity. First problem that he had, his health seemed to be failing. He wasn't around, he was away, and there were massive, massive problems with his presence within the country. And realistically speaking, it's hard to see how this guy actually is still in charge of the operation. It looks like he's the front of an operation because he has the brand recognition, but he isn't really running the party. Sometimes he even forgets when he started contesting elections, etc., etc. And at some point he said that he had won elections in 2005. So Buhari is slipping into being senile and not being a full and sound mind. So that's a concern. His health is definitely a concern, right? But secondly, he was very slow to act in some instances. He actually got the nickname Baba Go Slow because he was going so slow in making essential decisions, such as appointing a cabinet, which took him 6 months. He did try to attack people who were accused of corruption, but a lot of that got tainted because it looked like he was selectively attacking people on the grounds of corruption, right? Did he defeat Boko Haram? Simple answer, no, he did not.
Did he stabilize the security of the region? No, he did not. In fact, there were social media videos made by soldiers talking about how they didn't have functional tanks, how they didn't have guns, how they didn't have the necessary tools basically to secure the regions wherein they were being deployed to, and how they felt like their lives were actually at risk in those areas. And basically Buhari failed to secure the country. Did he have some achievements? Mixed bag. There were some developments, some road projects, etc., etc. Mixed bag. Corruption is still the order of the day. Poverty, unemployment, still the order of the day. The country is still suffering from massive insecurity, even though the Boko Haram threat is reduced, but it's not significantly reduced. What is Buhari's ideology? There isn't really one ideology. There's just an ideology of pick me, I'll get you the jobs that I said I would get. Give me more time, basically. So there's a lot of fluff in the air. There isn't really anything Marxist, Leninist, socialist. There isn't a lot of what you would consider conventional political theory driving this debate. It's really a stomach debate. Jobs, security, corruption. These are the issues that are dominating the Nigerian populace. Nobody there is thinking about what should our relationship be. Nobody's thinking there about what their relation should be with Israel. Nobody's thinking there about whether or not, you know, American hegemony is a threat, whether China and their presence in Africa is problematic. It's not that level of ideological positioning in this debate. It's very pragmatic. The people are concerned about the pragmatics because of the high poverty levels. Now, the other candidate in this race is Atiku. Now, Atiku has been vice president twice. He was one of the founding members of the PDP. He left the PDP sometimes. He was vice president under Obasanjo, and Obasanjo was very critical of him, called him a corrupt man, an unethical man, a rascal, basically. And there are reasons for believing that some of this is valid, because Atiku has been implicated in massive corruption scandals. He's a businessman. He is worth over $1 billion US, according to some estimates. He made his business basically getting legitimate tenders from the state through some questionable measures. So he's in oil, he's in the logistics industry, and one of his early logistics moves was that they were doing logistics for the airports, and in fact they were collecting revenue and then paying the state after they had paid themselves, not the other way around. You know how, like, you in South Africa the government pays you as the service provider? No, in this instance they were paying government and telling government that this is how much you made, and here's your cut. We've already taken our share. And some people accuse him of having taken more than his share, and that was the basis of his money. There are allegations in the US that he is wanted by the FBI for financial fraud and associated crimes. He says he is not. He recently went to the United States and did a rally at the Trump Tower there in Washington. In fact, you know, it was well attended. He wasn't arrested, but the feedback on that has been that the American government didn't view it as an appropriate time to take action, because it would have been interfering with the election of the Nigerian elections directly by interfering and arresting him at that point. So they diplomatically deferred, and they may not even pursue this if he wins. What does he stand for, Atiku? Basically, he says that he can employ people, he can get the economy running again. He wants to privatize the national oil company. He thinks that's a better way to get revenue, and that's a better way to serve the people. A lot of people who are frustrated by Buhari, worried about his health, are looking at Atiku. They don't really care about the corruption scandals as much as people within the academic and intellectual circles care about the corruption scandals. There is a third element, though, to this election that I must mention, and that's godfathers. Godfathers are the governors of states who basically, or former governors of states who basically run that part of the world. Now, there's one, for instance, in Imo State. His name is Rochas, and Rochas basically runs Imo. He was the governor, and while he was the governor, basically he took as much money as he could, and as such, he basically controls who gets hired, fired, who gets appointed and demoted in that particular state. That's his capacity. There's one as well in Kanu. There's another one in another rich part of Nigeria in the south. And these godfathers basically, for instance, in Imo State, Rochas is supportive of APC, and APC has a stronghold there, even though APC is not that strong in the south. And in the north, you know, there are some godfathers who are now supporting PDP, even though the PDP is not strong in the north. Now, the Hausa and the Fulani live in the north. They are predominantly Muslim, and the Igbos and the Yorubas are living in the south, and they are either Christian, traditional religion, or also Muslim. The guys who are running in this election, both are from the north, and they're both Fulani, but they've chosen candidates from the south. One has chosen an Igbo man and the other has chosen a Yoruba man, and they're basically trying to make sure that there's a north-south balance in that. So that's some of the dynamics around the Nigerian elections. Will one party win or the other? It's unclear who is the favorite right now. The race is too close to call. There have been allegations of rigging, etc., because corruption is a thing in Nigeria. But you have to do the best you can there. I'm sure there'll be some attempts at rigging. I'm sure there'll be some complaints about the rigging. What we'll have to look at as an international community is what extent was it material, or was it clear that one side was winning over the other. Going to be very tough. Some of there was a stampede a few days ago at a political rally. One of the voting stations got burnt in one of the states. So it's not like 100% stable, but this is massive progress for Nigeria. Nigeria used to have just military dictatorships and coups, etc., and they haven't had one for 20 years. This is their 6th election. So even though it's a mess, it's way better than what they used to be under the dictatorships of a variety of guys who caused massive underdevelopment of the region. Now, in terms of future prospects of Nigeria, what do I think? Look, because of the ideological bankruptcy in the manifestos and the debates of the candidates, I don't really think that these guys have the vision for Africa that is going to take Nigeria forward. They don't have clarity of position, whether they are left, right. They don't have an understanding of why they want, and I'm saying they know they have an understanding. What I mean is that they don't have an ideological basis for choosing policy positions in one way or the other. It's very much a politics of pragmatics, very much a politics of realism, and I find that that's just insufficient. And both of these candidates are flawed candidates. I mean, on the one hand, Buhari, he's sick. I don't think he's going to make it. I don't think he's actually running things within his party. That's a problem. On the other hand, you've got Atiku, and even though his supporters say there's been no conclusive proof or convictions of his corruption, when you dig a little bit deeper, some of that stuff really leaves you with strong reservations about his character and his intentions for the people of Nigeria. I don't actually get much excitement watching Atiku or Buhari. I think there's a lot of space with the young guys for future elections, because as I mentioned, Nigeria's population 40% under 14, and then over 50% of the people voting are actually under the age of 30, and that's really where we're going to have to look. I hope that these young candidates can get their act together, raise more money for the next election, run as a unitary ticket, and then maybe we can really begin to see a new chapter ideologically and in terms of governance for Nigeria. But the two guys running, the two guys at the front of Nigeria, it's going to be more of the same in this election. I really don't see these guys being the guys to take Nigeria to the next level. I really think Nigerians as a whole have to seriously reflect on the quality ideologically of their politics and see what kind of ideological stance and positioning they want to adopt moving forward, and how that ideological positioning can get more prominence in their politics, because as it stands, it's not the main thing. And you do need to have ideological grounding to an extent. You do need more than just the pragmatic, so I'm going to end corruption, stop Boko Haram, and give people jobs by privatizing. We need more than that. And even though that is informed, if you do a deep dive, you will find some ideology driving this, but I do think there's a dearth of vision, a dearth of ideological positioning, and as a result, I don't think that these particular individuals will take Nigeria forward. That's all I have time for. Thank you so much for tuning in. Catch you in the next one. Have a great weekend, and we're going to follow up on this particular election after the results are announced. This has been Mighty Jamie, and you have been watching We Vote.